Hello and welcome again to Cherry TV. I'm Ian McNay and I'm sitting here with John Reed, who's our Director of Catalogue.
Hello.
And John and I are going to talk about another of our box set releases. John has put together many box sets over the years, and it's very much a kind of hallmark of Cherry. That's something that we do, and we do it in hopefully a very interesting way. So this one is called Optimism Reject. So
yes.
How did you get the title for this?
Well, that's actually a song titled by Patrick Fitzgerald. But this box set spun off two other titles. One was the independent late 70s punk box called Action Time Vision. And the other was the sort of companion post-punk box called To the Outside of Everything. And I guess post-punk music had a more abstract nature, and so that was reflected in the title of this one. But this box set was inspired by a lot of the tracks that fell between the cracks of those two previous box sets, but also looking at our publishing catalogue. And of course, Cherry Red at the time was sort of provided a home for a lot of people putting out their own records, the kind that were really inspired by John Peel Show and that whole DIY spirit where anyone could do it, and lots did, and some of them did it quite well. So Cherry Red would end up picking up the publishing, and so we were looking at, well, these are things that we should be reissuing because there's some wonderful little tracks in there. So the idea was to do something that was again a sort of a third companion or the third volume of this series of box sets. And Optimism Reject just seemed to be a nice play on words, really. It was abstract, but then there was an optimistic spirit. This was a time when people felt buoyed by what punk had offered them. Suddenly they had the energy and the drive and the imagination and, in a sense, the entrepreneurial spirit to get off their asses and do something, and make records themselves, find the money somehow. And although it was difficult, if you could sell these records, suddenly these records were selling in reasonable volume. The independent charts started up, and some of these records sold in more, higher volumes, and certainly than they would today. So, optimism, yes, let's make records ourselves, but reject the past. There was an element of just, there's a new world order with these things. So I kind of like that playful element.
And there was a very young energy, because just looking here at the initial tracks, you've got E to the first track.
Yeah.
They were 16 years old. Yeah. Drones, ATV, and The Outsiders, Adrian Borland, who's sadly no longer with us, but I think was 17 when he had that band, The Outsiders. So there was a lot of young, youthful spirit, which was inspired by...
And two of those, the Drones and The Outsiders, were on their own label. So again, we try to concentrate, it's not exclusively artists that only put records out on their own label, because I think over 4 hours or more, 5 hours, that would be quite difficult. So we tried to mix up records on independent labels, the odd record on a major, but not many, and a lot of bands, doing their first record. So for example, we have the Associates' Boys Keep Swinging cover of Bowie, which is far and away not their best track, but it's a record that was on their own label that then got them signed. So we tried to have, and Sisters of Mercy, who are known as a goth band, but in 1980, again, they're just a post-punk group trying to find their way and put out their own record on Merciful Release, which eventually becomes this big label which has other bands signed to it. But in 1980, The Damage Done is just a really obscure single like anyone else's. So, mixing up the familiar names with their kind of first release with other bands like Scissor Fits or whoever most people have never heard of.
Yeah, so it was quite a broad brief you had, if you like, you were kind of... Your emphasis was on, as you say, was on spirit, was on newness in terms of rejecting the past, mainly independent, but a few major. So what were the kind of bands that didn't get on there? Kind of what was
didn't get on there? Well, actually thinking about it, I don't actually think there are any tracks that were on majors at the time. It's probably just that we licensed them from majors. So
yeah.
So we would have, if you look at bands that are on To the Outside of Everything, a band like Ultravox or Wire, they fit musically, but they don't fit because they immediately signed to major record companies. Whereas this time round, there were a few groups who'd eluded us. So I definitely wanted a lot of the Rough Trade era groups in terms of the sound and bands that were specifically on Rough Trade. So we wanted Young Marble Giants, Final Day, it's a classic track. Prag Vec, Essential Logic, you know, the band that evolved out of Laura Logic's band after X-Ray Specs. See, they'd been on a major, and she comes off that and makes far more adventurous music really than X-Ray Specs, although they were a great band, on Rough Trade. So there were a few groups, and Subway Sect, who were just such an inspirational group from the original punk generation, never really fulfilled their potential, but Vic Goddard, an amazing character. So there were a few choice artists and tracks that we sought them out this time around because we really wanted to have them on this box set because they've eluded us up to now.
See, for me, obviously I am of a certain age, just flicking through and I just get to this page here and you've got the Laughing Apple, which was Alan McGee, Joe Foster, and who else was it? The guy from Primal Scream was on there.
Yeah, Laughing Apple was Alan McGee, Andrew Innes.
Andrew Innes, that's right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So.
And then you have the Marine Girls, the same page, Tracy Thorn's first band. So you really are picking up really interesting and successful people at a really early stage.
So a lot of them were, but equally there's lots of groups who, you know, never went anywhere. So there were obscure singles on Red Rhino Records that obviously also we own, which we never used before. So yeah, the spirit, did the record sound, did it have that kind of, I guess, would John Peel have played it, would be the kind of default position really. But even that Laughing Apple track, Chips for Tea, it's a kind of novelty track, but it fitted the DIY spirit. There's a group on there called 49 Americans, whose records featured about 20 tracks on a 7-inch. They were these very short, sharp shot sort of tracks, made very much like it sounded like in a bedroom. But we thought 49 Americans, they seem to epitomise the spirit of the DIY sort of ethos. So again, we managed to track them down. I should mention Richard Anderson, my colleague, who put this together, because he really was the one who did the hard graft on it. I just sat back and said, I don't like the cover, or I like this thing. So Richard Anderson deserves special mention for this box set for all his hard work.
Okay. Was there many acts on here or many records on here that you didn't actually know beforehand?
Lots. Probably a third of them, maybe a half, yeah. Or I might have heard of the act, like Normal Hawaiians, but I didn't know that track, so... Yeah, so that's part of the fun, listening to it. And even Isla Singaza, who'll be well known to anyone involved in the Cherry Red world, but most of their tracks are more of a sort of synth pop or an indie synth pop persuasion. But there's that one track that was the B-side of their very first single that was originally on Ambivalent Scale Records, their own label, which I think then was reissued on Cherry Red. So again, that felt like it fitted because we're essentially saying, yes, but this is their own record on their own label, that's what we're reflecting here. Okay.
Will there be a follow-up, do you think?
Oh yes, no, there is one, which we're looking at, which is a kind of what you might call a punk funk compilation. And we've even got a working title, Shake the Foundations. So that's one we're working on for next year.
Yeah, great. Okay, John, thank you very much.
Great.
All he sees is a back of chairs, in the mirror a lack of hairs, a light round which he fills out, hear the players all shout, bingo masters break out, bingo masters break out, bingo masters break out. A glass of lager in his hand, silver microphone in his hand, wasting time in numbers and rhyme.